Welcome to the first call in our Winter and Spring 2013 Lunch and Learn series, New Tools for Teaching About Tzedakah, Poverty, and Privilege. We are pleased to be joined by Lisa Exler. Today, Lisa will provide an overview of Where Do You Give, a Tzedakah Curriculum out of American Jewish World Service, focusing on new tools for teaching about tzedakah, poverty, and privilege, with a focus on sessions particularly relevant to teen philanthropy work. This call will include demonstrations of those relevant pieces of the curriculum and will offer tools for both those new to the field and those looking to invigorate their programs. There will be time for questions, so please let us know if you have a question in the chat box, which is only visible to Lisa and I, and we will call on you to ask those questions to the group at the appropriate time. Before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about Lisa. She's a senior educator in the Experiential Education Department at American Jewish World Service and the editor of Where Do You Give, a Tzedakah Curriculum, which she'll be sharing with us today. In her 5 years at AJWS, she has developed and managed a range of educational materials that promote the value of global citizenship in the Jewish community. Prior to joining AJWS, she taught at the Solomon Schechter School of Manhattan. Lisa has a BA and MA in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies from Brandeis University, is a graduate of a one-year program at Midrashet Lindenbaum in Jerusalem, and was a Dorot Fellow in Israel in 2005 to 2006. She lives in New York City with her husband, Eli, and her daughters, Maytal and Amalia. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Lisa, if you could press *7, we'll make sure you're not muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
There we go. I thought we didn't have to do that as presenter. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay, no problem. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Naomi, and I'm really excited to be with you today and to be sharing pieces of the Where Do You Give curriculum. I'm going to give a brief overview of the curriculum and talk a little bit about how it was developed and what we think makes it a unique Tzedakah curriculum. Then I'm going to do a demonstration with you of one of the activities from the curriculum, which I think is certainly one that you can use with the folks that you're working with. And then, so that'll be kind of an interactive opportunity to experience a piece of the curriculum. And then I'll give an overview of a few other activities from the curriculum that I think might be particularly useful for your work. And then we'll have some time for a question and answer and discussion. So just very briefly, an overview of the curriculum. It's a curriculum that was funded by the Jim Joseph Foundation and was developed by myself and some of my colleagues at AJWS. We drew on our own experience working in different educational settings, and we also piloted the curriculum with a couple of schools in Brooklyn last year before we released it in the summer. And it's now been downloaded by over 650 people at around 450 or so institutions. So we're thrilled with the sort of reach that the curriculum has had, and I'm happy to share pieces of it with you today. I think that it really can support the work of teen philanthropy foundations by serving as a tool to strengthen students' learning about tzedakah and reflection on tzedakah, kind of as a complement to the practical application that happens in a lot of teen foundations of how they're actually giving away and making decisions about tzedakah. So the curriculum, I think, is unique in 4 different ways. First of all, it empowers students to articulate their own tzedakah priorities and examine their giving decisions. So it communicates to students that tzedakah isn't something that just adults or rabbis and Jewish leaders make decisions about. It's relevant to their own lives, and it actually offers them an opportunity to act on the things that are really important to them in a concrete way and make a difference in the world. It also situates tzedakah in the context of current social justice issues. And we're going to a few of the activities that I talk about today are going to demonstrate the way in which the curriculum communicates to students that tzedakah is extremely relevant to their lives and to the world that they live in. and it's an opportunity for them to respond to some of the social issues in the world that they find troubling or upsetting. The curriculum also incorporates Jewish text and history and culture, and the texts that we try to include are not only the kind of most popularly taught texts about tzedakah, but also some ones that we hope that students may not have seen before. And this helps to communicate to students that not only is tzedakah relevant, but Judaism is also relevant and has a lot of wisdom and insight to share about questions of tzedakah. And finally, the curriculum itself includes a lot of different modes of technology and social media. So it communicates with students in the modes that they are using in their own communication and their own social lives. So it also kind of is current with those trends in education. So I want to demonstrate now an activity from the curriculum, which is called Would You Rather, which helps students to identify a whole range of factors that can guide their decision-making around where to give and can help them clarify their own opinions and their values. So often I think students are making quick decisions about where to give, and it's basically like, oh, I've heard of this organization, or my friend gives to this organization. And so this activity is really meant to help students take a step back and reflect on what's important to them and how do they make decisions around tzedakah. So the way that I play this game with people in person is a sort of two sides of the room activity where I will give you two choices of where to give your tzedakah, and you would stand on one side of the room or the other so you can kind of get a visual. We're going to do it on this webinar through a voting feature, which I'll explain to you in a minute, but we'll still be able to get a sense of all of us in this virtual room where we fall on these different issues. So I'm going to give you two choices of where to donate your tzedakah, and you need to decide which one you would rather give to. Okay, so the first choice is an organization that sends doctors to clinics in villages in India to perform surgery and train health workers. The second choice is a local clinic that provides medical care to low-income residents of your city. And you're going to, in a minute, I'm going to tell you how to vote. You're going to have to choose one of these or the other. There's no, I would give to both. Although, obviously, in the real world, we can give to both. I think this exercise highlights the fact that even in the real world, we still have to make decisions. We don't have unlimited resources. So, you should see on your screen now the voting screen where you can click on one of the two options, and I'll read the options again because we were limited in how many characters we could put in for the voting. So the first choice is an organization that sends doctors to clinics in villages in India to perform surgery and train health workers. The second choice is a local clinic that provides medical care to low-income residents of your city. And we'll take a minute now for people to just record their votes. Okay, looks like we have most of the votes in, so we're going to display those results. Okay, can folks see the bar graph? So we had 4 votes for sending doctors to clinics in India, the organization that sends doctors to clinics in villages in India to perform surgery and train health workers. And we had, 25 votes for a local clinic that provides medical care to low-income residents of your city. So I'd like to take maybe a few comments just to hear from people why you chose the organization that you chose or the cause that you chose.
Please, I'm going to unmute everyone now.
Okay, great.
The conference has been unmuted.
Great. So there were only 4 folks who voted for India. So does one of those people want to speak up and say why you voted for that?
Yeah, this is Eric Nicastro from OCAE, one of the 4 who selected the India organization. Felt that local place would probably have more opportunities for government funding or city funding as opposed to a foreign country where those kinds of fundings are less readily available.
Great. So I think that points out to one factor which we tend to consider, which is what are the other sources of funding for this organization or this cause or this population? And so some of us will make choices to give to what we perceive as an underfunded organization or cause. That's great. Does one other person who chose India want to offer their thinking behind that?
Sure. This is Robin in Atlanta. It may be the job. I used to have Eric's job in Orange County, so maybe that's the influence. But I really felt that the fact that they were going to train other workers was the kicker for me, and that it would go beyond and pay it forward in some way.
Great. So another factor that we might consider is the sustainability of the solution, right? Is this like a one-time response which is going to continually need to be repeated, or are we giving tzedakah in a way that gets more to the root of the problem and is a more sustainable solution? Great. Those are 2 great factors to point out. So there were a lot of folks who chose the local option, low-income residents of a medical clinic for low-income residents of your own city. Are there a couple people who want to speak to why they chose that?
Hi, this is Tracy from calling from Memphis, and I almost want to change my vote since I can't. I really feel that I encourage my teams and I myself like to give to my own community to try to improve my own community.
Sorry, it was a little bit hard to hear you. Can you say it again?
Yeah, hi. I feel like I like to give to support my own community too, and I like to educate my teams that, there are so many ways that we can help make our own community a better place.
Great. So I think this is really a factor that comes up for a lot of people in making decisions about tzedakah, which is a sense of community and a sense that primary responsibility is to one's own community, whether that's defined locally or as the Jewish community, but that those who are closest to us are those to whom we have the primary responsibility. Great. One other person from who chose that option?
Sure, I'll share. Just the idea that accountability and being able to do effective tzedakah internationally can be really challenging, and there's a level of being able to monitor the program, make sure the services are being provided, and feel accountable for the tzedakah I was offering locally to make sure that the money was actually being used appropriately.
Great.
And effectively.
So, I think that's really important. Accountability and ability to measure impact, which is often much easier to do in a local context than in a global one. Great. So these are just from this question, we've raised a whole number of factors that come into play when we're making tzedakah decisions. And I just wanted to add, because I forgot to mention this at the beginning, that when I do this activity with students, while I say that you have to make a choice, you have to stand on one side of the room or the other, I do encourage students to switch sides of the room if someone makes an argument or says something that's really compelling to them and they decide that they want to change their mind. So there is, option and room to be persuaded and convinced and to persuade and convince others in this exercise. So we're going to do one more. The next one is, would you rather give to your local public library, which runs an after-school program that helps low-income elementary school students improve their reading and writing skills, or your synagogue scholarship fund that helps Jewish students in your community go to Hebrew school, day school, or Jewish summer camp. And I'm gonna move to the voting screen, and I'll reread the options so you can think about them while you're voting. So the choices are your local public library, which runs an after-school program that helps low-income elementary school students improve their reading and writing skills. Or would you rather give to your synagogue scholarship fund that helps Jewish students in your community go to Hebrew school, day school, or Jewish summer camp? And we'll give another minute for people to make their votes. Okay, I'm going to show you the results for this one. This one was, the vote was a little bit closer. So we'll start off with the local public library. Somebody who voted for that, do you want to explain why you chose that one? Okay, does anybody who voted for the scholarship fund want to explain why they chose that one?
Hi, this is Hallie from Chicago. I support both of those things, but I thought it was easier to give money to my synagogue scholarship fund and time to my public library after-school program. So I could support both, but one by volunteering and one by giving tzedakah.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think another thing that people consider is what else can I give besides money, and how am I kind of balancing that out? So to a place where I can't give my time, I'll give my money, and maybe if there's a place that I can give my time to, like I would rather give my time there and save my money for somewhere else. Great. That's a great factor to consider. One more comment, either about the Synagogue Scholarship Fund or the Public Library after-school program.
This is Jackie Fishman. So in my real life, I don't know if I would have. I voted for the public library, and in my real life, I don't know if I would have done it that way. But I think side by side, seeing the public library and helping low-income students with low-income children with literacy versus helping students go to summer camp, it just felt like the need was larger for the public library. Side by side, right? But if I was looking at them individually, I don't know if I would have seen it that way. Great.
So I think that highlights two things. One is need as a factor to consider when making tzedakah decisions, and I think often people are inclined to give to the place that they perceive has the greatest need, and also the question of are you considering all of your tzedakah options at once, right? Like, are you comparing all of the different places that you could give against each other, or are you making kind of, one-off decisions? And that's really, I think, a question for all of us as we kind of evolve in our ability to give tzedakah is are we seeing the big picture of our tzedakah giving all at once? So I hope one of the things that this activity illustrated is that there are a range of different factors that we consider when we decide where we're going to give, and that often those factors can come into conflict with each other. And so it's a really complicated process of clarifying our own values and then seeing how they apply to complicated choices, right? Like we have choices that it's not just about geography, but it's also about level of need, and it also can be about, Jewish community and how that plays into it. So all of these questions and factors are at play. And I want to look very quickly at a Jewish text because Jewish sources have been debating these issues and these very questions for centuries, and I think that our conversation about this is really part of that debate. So we're going to look together at a text from a 4th century scholar that's recorded in the Talmud that highlights these questions.
Lisa, is now a good time to mute everyone just so we eliminate background noise?
I was going to ask for somebody to read the text and for a couple of comments, so let's keep it open for another couple of minutes.
Okay.
Great. So do I have a volunteer to read the text? You can read it in English if you'd like.
Yes, I'll read it. This is Sarah Nessen in the Bay Area.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome. So this is from the Talmud, Bava Metzia, 71a. Rabbi Yosef taught about the verse in the Torah that says, if you lend money to any of my people that are poor with you. Exodus 22:24. This verse teaches that if you have to choose between a Jew and a non-Jew, give to the Jew first. A poor person and a rich person, give to the poor person first. A poor relative and poor people in your town, give to your poor relative first. Poor people in your city and poor people in another city, give to the poor people of your own town first.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So what do people think is kind of the underlying principle that's guiding Rabbi Yosef to assign these priorities? What would you say is his guiding principle?
This is Sarah. I'll speak again.
Sure.
So I think this is Joseph Caro, and I believe that he is emphasizing the close community first, the person closest to you.
Great.
With the exception of the second bullet, which is about, it just seems like an obvious estimation of who actually needs money more, a poor person or a rich person. But other than that, I think his emphasis was on your close community.
Great. So I think that's true. I think, and that came up in our discussion earlier, that his organizing principle seems to be the people who are closest to you are the people to whom you have primary responsibility, and yet there's this second statement, right, which I think can complicate that, which is that he's also giving priority based on level of need. So I think that came up in the question that we just did, right? Which is, if you would, how do you choose between the Jewish people in your community who have what might be perceived as a lesser degree of need, and the non-Jewish people in your community who might be perceived as having a higher degree of need, right? And so already we start to see some of those tensions, even within this system of priority. How do folks feel about about Rabbi Yosef's system? Do you agree with it? Does it work for you? Are there things about it that challenge you?
Hi, this is Josie from Memphis.
Yeah.
And there will always be poor people. And at some point, you will exhaust your financial resources. So at some point, you have to choose between your money and your time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that that's why we have texts like this, right? Because they're responding to this reality that our financial resources are limited. We need to make decisions about how we're going to use them, and sometimes it can be helpful to have a system or a framework for making those decisions. So what I would I'm going to kind of close our conversation here, but what I would do with students at this point is take a few more comments and also ask students how this text relates to their answers to the questions in the Would You Rather activity. Did they find that their answers kind of aligned with this or didn't, and why? And then I would ask students to write their own version of it. If I were writing my own version, it would be something like, Lisa teaches When giving tzedakah and deciding between poverty and other justice issues, poverty comes first. When deciding between your own community and other communities, your own community comes first. And I would ask students to write down their version of this as kind of not a set in stone, something that they couldn't change, but something that they could use as kind of guiding principles for their own giving of tzedakah. So I'm glad we had an opportunity to kind of try out a piece of the curriculum. I think it's helpful to be the students before we are the facilitators. So I hope that people enjoyed that and could imagine how they might use this with others. And I want to go do an overview now of several other activities that are in the curriculum, which we're not going to demonstrate, but I'll describe them for you, that I think are particularly useful. The first few focus on our connections to people around the world and our relative power and privilege vis-a-vis those people. And I think it's important to include power and privilege in a tzedakah curriculum or in teaching about tzedakah because that's economic injustice and the imbalance in power and privilege is exactly what we're trying to respond to through tzedakah. So taking some time to unpack those issues, I think, is really important because, in essence, that's what tzedakah is there for, is to address those injustices and imbalances. And so I think it's helpful for students to understand the problem in order to be more motivated to solve the problem. So for each activity, just at the top of the slide, you'll see the title of the activity and then the session and the page number from the Where Do You Give curriculum where the activity is written up. So you don't need to, I'm going to sort of talk you through the activity. You don't need necessarily to write it all down because it's all written up, like the full lesson plan, in the Where Do You Give curriculum. So this first activity is Global Connections, and it really establishes the ways in which we are connected to people all around the world. And hopefully the more connected we feel to them, the more inclined we may be to help them and to respond to their needs. So in this activity, I ask students to identify one country, not the United States, that they've interacted with in that day. And it can be the country that their clothing was made in, the country of a kind of food that they ate, the country of origin of people that they encountered maybe on their way to school that day, or a country that they heard mentioned on the radio. And I make a list of those countries. And then if you have a map in in the room that you're working in, you can even find them and kind of put pins on a map to show all the different places around the world and people around the world that we have a connection to. And then I do a discussion with the students using the questions that you can see on the slide. What are the kinds of ways that we're connected to people around the world? What does it mean to have these connections? And then what do you know about what life is like in these countries? To start to set up this question of how do people all around the world live? We have, connections to them in various different ways, and what are their lives like? The next activity takes off from this global perspective and looks at how wealth is distributed around the world. So for this activity, I asked for 10 volunteers. Each volunteer represents 10% of the world's population. And then I asked each of the volunteers to take a number out of the hat. So this sets up the randomness of who gets what in terms of wealth in the world. So each student draws a number out of a hat from 1 to 10, and then they line up in the order of their numbers. And then I take 100 of a small object, 100 pennies or 100 candies, and distribute them. And these 100 candies or pennies or whatever it is represents all of the wealth in the world, which then gets distributed to each 10% of the population. And so I give the candies or the pennies out to students according to the numbers in this chart. which is based on the actual wealth distribution in the world. So it's hard to do the fractions. So some students get no candies, several students get one, and then, going up, one gets 2, one gets 3, and one gets 9, and then the student who represents the top 10% of income distribution gets 83 candies or pennies. And so then I ask students, ask the volunteers who actually got the candies or the pennies how they feel about this distribution, and then ask the other students who are watching the activity what they think of this distribution of wealth. And then also debrief this activity using some of the questions that are on the slide. If the candies represent wealth, then what does this say about how wealth is divided in the world? And then what do you think about this distribution? Is this a world of tzedakah, of justice? How do you feel about wealth in the world being distributed in this way? And does this activity make you want to do anything? Why or why not? And if so, what? So this really starts to raise the issues of privilege, of economic privilege, and of injustice in terms of the way in which wealth is distributed. And hopefully what comes out of this activity is, the question of whether the person who has the 83 candies or the 10% of the population who has the most of the wealth should be redistributing that wealth in some way, and that leads into the conversation about tzedakah and how we allocate our resources. The next activity also follows on that theme and really highlights the lottery or randomness aspect that we picked up with in the previous activity by pulling the numbers out of the hat. This activity uses the cartoon to illustrate this randomness of privilege or wealth or lack thereof into which we're born. So I'm just going to give a minute for people to look at the cartoon and take it in. So one of the things that I think is really helpful about the previous activity and also about this cartoon is that I find that a lot of times students have a tendency to either blame people for their poverty or try to explain why people who are poor wouldn't be poor if they only did X, Y, or Z, or try to understand their own wealth or privilege by explaining what it was that they or their parents or their grandparents did in order to have the wealth that they have. And I think that what's helpful about this activity is that it really highlights that we have very little control. We have no control over the circumstances into which we were born, and those circumstances have a lot of influence over the wealth that we're able to accumulate. And so this cartoon, I think, really highlights that as the moment of birth and all of the different challenging situations into which most people in the world are born. So this activity can be done as a whole class discussion, or it can be done kind of chavruta style by pairing students and having them look at the cartoon together. Another thing that I think often comes out of this cartoon is that the slices on the wheel or in the pie that are challenging circumstances, poverty, war, famine, disease, there are many more of those than there are of wealth or middle class. And so that's also, I think, important for students to understand, which they also can get from the previous activity about the number of people in the world who are living in these difficult circumstances. And then, again, there are some discussion questions here to guide conversation. And then the second part of this activity, which is not here, is there's a Jewish text that also uses the image of a wheel to describe wealth and poverty. And so that's a nice text to use as a complement to this image. So the next activity is called Miniature World, and it follows the theme of wealth distribution, but this activity, kind of like the cartoon, expands to include other factors besides wealth, things like access to goods and services, which, again, I think is helpful for students to start to understand that, one thing that's very important is how much money or wealth someone has, but also important is all kinds of other conditions in their lives, and the access that they have to the goods and services they need, their human rights, all kinds of other issues. So in this activity, I ask also for 10 volunteers, and each volunteer gets a sign that says, I represent 680 million people, which is about 10% of the world's population. And then I ask students to step forward. I tell them I'm going to read a number of statements, and ask students to step forward if that statement applies to them. And students usually don't necessarily know the statistics here, so they can discuss amongst themselves or guess how many students should step forward for each of the different statistics or questions. So they're about access to clean water, literacy, access to the internet, and access to food, or the issue of hunger. And this also kind of gives students a sense of around the world what are the different issues that people are facing and what numbers of people are facing those issues. So it can be a little bit the visual impact is not so great if one student steps forward for not having access to clean water, but then when you remind students that this is almost a billion people who don't have access to clean water, then all of a sudden I think it becomes much more difficult to come to terms with. And then, again, I would unpack or debrief this activity with some questions about what surprised you, why do you think some people have enough food, water, or access to the internet or are literate while other people aren't. So starting to get students to think about what are some of the causes of poverty. How did this activity make you feel, and what do you think this activity has to do with tzedakah? And also in the curriculum, there's a link to a video which illustrates all of these same ideas very visually and nicely. So it can be done as an interactive activity with students stepping forward. It can also be done by watching this video. And then the last activity that I wanted to review kind of takes us away from the theme of power and privilege and moves into the question of tzedakah strategies, which can be really important for students who are actually involved in allocating money. And this activity explains the difference between tzedakah that responds to immediate needs versus tzedakah that responds to the root causes or societal structures or policies that create the need for tzedakah. So this relates back to that first would you rather activity where someone mentioned that the organization in India that's training other health workers, that she found that compelling because that was addressing sort of a more root cause of the problem. So for this activity, I would write the words immediate need and root cause on chart paper, and have students brainstorm examples of actions which fall into each category. So on the left side of the screen for immediate needs, you can see things like giving out supplies to homeless people, working in a soup kitchen. Those are often direct service ways that respond to the immediate needs of people living in poverty. And I think that those often tend to be where students are naturally drawn, both in terms of volunteering their time and also in terms of their money. And then on the other side, which can be a little bit more difficult for students to come up with or to think about, are the root causes, which are issues like education, access to education, and policy or advocacy, and that those are supporting organizations that are working on things like job training or advocacy is a way of trying to tackle the problems more at the root and prevent the poverty from beginning in the first place. And related to that is a great text which you can see in the middle of your screen from Rashi on Leviticus, which compares someone who is struggling with poverty to a load that's on a donkey, right? And that when the load is still on the donkey, it takes much less effort to keep it up there. But once it falls, it's a much bigger effort to raise it back up. And so I think this can help students think about sort of what we call preventive tzedakah, tzedakah that's addressing more root causes and trying to prevent people from falling into poverty in the first place. So again, this is an activity, the text study, which can be done as a whole class or in chavruta and partners. And then I would also, again, in the curriculum, there are some guiding questions that students can use when they are studying the text. So I hope that I'm going to open it up for a minute for questions about Would You Rather and about those activities and about the curriculum. I just wanted to say one closing word, which is that I hope that this gave you a sense of some of the activities in the curriculum that might be useful to your work. The website is on the screen for where you can download the curriculum. And in addition, there are several other resources that you can find at that address. One is called Making It Real, a guide to the tzedakah allocations process, which AJWS created in partnership with the Jewish Teen Funders Network. And that's really a guide to the whole process of allocating tzedakah, and includes some of these educational activities and also kind of a step-by-step, how do you go through this process of if your class has money that it's raised and wants to give away, how do you make those decisions about where it should go? The Year in Giving is another resource which connects tzedakah to Jewish holidays and offers suggestions for learning and activities for each of the Jewish holidays that are related to tzedakah. Certainly Purim, which is right around the corner, is a great opportunity with the mitzvah of matanot le'avyonim, of gifts to the poor, but all of the Jewish holidays can be connected in some way to issues of justice and tzedakah, so we offer that in that resource. And also there's one called Tzedakah Taking Root, which is about strengthening the tzedakah culture in your institution. It's great for students in a specific class to be learning about tzedakah, and I think that supporting their learning by thinking about what are other ways that your institution is engaged in talking about and giving tzedakah can really support that and strengthen the culture of tzedakah across the organization or the institution. So that's a resource for how to do that. So now I'm happy to take questions about any of the activities that I went over, or about the curriculum generally and teaching tzedakah. I think that we're going to ask for people to put their questions in the chat. Is that right, Naomi?
Yeah, we're just let me know if you have a question so I can call on you, since we do have a lot of people on the call. Lisa, I'm going to unmute everyone now, and I already have first questions, so just hang on a sec.
Great.
The conference has been unmuted.
Okay, so now you're unmuted. If you are typing loudly, because there's a bunch of typing sounds, please mute yourself by pressing *7. Thanks. And you can unmute yourself with *7 if you have something to say. So I just want to open, let's see, Debbie. Debbie? Is Debbie there? Okay, I'm going to ask her question for her because she typed it into the chat. So Lisa, is there an activity from the curriculum which can be used in a single session that gives the major points of facts to consider when making giving choices?
Naomi, this is Robin. I cannot hear anything you're saying because whoever's typing.
I think it's not their fault; it's mine.
Okay.
*7 seems to have not worked because no one got muted. So
okay.
I'm going to try to mute people as we go.
Okay, great. And I'll talk loud. So the Would You Rather activity exists as a single session activity, which we actually created for Hanukkah, and it's called Got Gelt, and it connects, the question of giving and receiving around Hanukkah to these issues of tzedakah. So that activity, which is really the one that's most focused on questions about, not so much about power and privilege, but more about making decisions about how to allocate tzedakah, that is available as a single session. And the curriculum itself is divided into 8 sessions. And each one of them can stand alone as a single session. So if there's one piece that you're particularly interested in doing, you can do that as a single session.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So what about you? I see you have a question. So.
Oh, sorry, I typed it in. Okay. So my question is, you mentioned some video resources, and then you showed that store cartoon. And I'm wondering if on your website, if we're able to pull those out and use those in our Facebook groups with our teams and use them in our curriculum digitally like that, or do we always have to redirect them to the website? Can we pull things out and share them on Facebook?
It's a great question. So all of the videos are on the Where Do You Give website on a particular page. I think it's called Get Inspired or something like that. I can look for the link and send it. But they're also all, a lot of them are from YouTube. So it's also possible to find the specific link on YouTube and just share that. Yeah. And
what about the graphics, like that sword cartoon?
Yeah, that's great. I have to look into that because we actually bought the rights to that cartoon. It's copyrighted, so I'm not sure what the rules are about sharing it through Facebook. But I'm sure technologically creative folks can find a way to isolate the image and share it. Yeah.
We won't talk about that.
No, I didn't say that.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't see any in the chat, so if you have something you're thinking about, you can also just... Oh, there's a comment. Celeste, could you make your comment to all of us?
Hi, am I unmuted? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Hi, this is Celeste Albert from the Jewish Community Foundation in Princeton. I have to say this curriculum is fabulous. We've used some of the activities this year in our program, and just wanted to say that it was very well thought out, very interactive, and thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. It's great to hear from someone who's actually using it, and I'm glad that it's working so well for you.
Celeste, could I actually ask a question? Could you give us 1 or 2 examples of something that you used with your Jewish Teen Foundation program? I'd love to hear how it's specifically being applied, or what parts are being applied in our particular setting, since it is JTFN call.
Sure. So we did Would You Rather, but we did a twist on it. We actually had philanthropists come, and this is the activity we did with them, and we spoke to the philanthropists ahead of time. What are some key things we would like to review with the teams about giving? And we actually had the philanthropists, along with our staff, do the activity where all of the teams would go from one side to the other, so it really made everybody participate in the activity. And it was a great tool. We also used Tzedakah strategy about different ways, and I apologize, I hope this is the same curriculum I'm thinking of, where a lot of times grants are posed, and there's different ways people can write a grant. It could be for direct need, it could be for education, it could be for something else, and it really educated the teams about different reasons why certain grants appeal for certain causes. I'm trying to pull it up, so I apologize. Go to another comment, but I just thought it was great.
Thanks, Celeste.
Yeah, thank you, Celeste. It's part of that same, it's all part of session 4. The activity that I talked about was the immediate needs and root causes, and then there's, like you said, there's another activity around Tzedakah strategies, which is more about kind of the different strategies that organizations use to tackle a particular problem, and that there's more than one way to fight poverty or to fight hunger, and students can think about like what approach resonates with them.
Yeah, and we actually tailored it to the mission of each group. So we sort of tailored it to Jewish arts and advocacy organizations. So it was a really neat tool.
Great, thank you.
I also just see in the chat that Rabbi Susie Moskowitz shares that she also used Would You Rather last night in her Team Foundation. So I want to open to one more question because we're going to conclude in a couple of minutes. So are there any more questions out there? All right then.
Naomi, I just wanted to add about the Would You Rather activity that we did 2 of the questions. I think there are about 8 of them, which all of them kind of highlight different factors that people consider when making their tzedakah decisions. So there's even more for that activity than what you saw, and I think that's one of the reasons why folks really, really enjoy using it.
So before we finish up, any other comments about things you think you might use with your Jewish Team Foundation? You can let me know if you have a comment in the chat, or you can just say it out. Most of you are unmuted unless there was background noise coming from your line. Well, I'm sure Lisa would join me in saying that we'd love to hear, what you're using and how you're using it. So you can, be in touch with me, and Naomi, and I'll definitely pass that on to Lisa. And I know we were posting a little bit on our Facebook page during the call, so anything you want to share there and through Twitter are both welcome. Any last thing you want to say in closing, Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to really thank you, Naomi, and the Jewish Teen Funders Network, both for inviting me to share this resource with you on the call, and also for just being a great partner in this work of educating our next generation about tzedakah and about giving responsibly and thoughtfully. So thank you to you, and thank you actually also to everyone who's on the call who's really doing that work directly with teens. I get to write the curriculum, and then I really leave it to you to do the work of implementing it, and it's great to know that so many folks are really thinking carefully about this and about how we educate people around tzedakah.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for presenting. We really enjoyed hearing from you today, and thank you also for including us in the TAP portion, the tzedakah allocations guide of this curriculum. I also want to ask one thing of all of you before we conclude, which is that when the conference is over and you close out the webinar window, a comment form is going to pop up. And we're going to ask you today to use that form, to use the short answer spaces in that form to share 2 things with us. First, something you liked about the call and something that you would improve about the call. We'd love to hear those things, and we thank you in advance for giving some feedback to help us bring you presentations that are relevant and useful to your work. So I think that is all about today, but I do want to remind you that our next Lunch and Learn call is only a few weeks away. It's on March 12th, and it's titled Unpacking the Bay Area Jewish Teen Foundation's Retreat. So it's a great chance to learn about how one program integrates a lot of things into a retreat weekend, and we'll be hearing from some of the people who are on today's call as presenters next time. And before we all hang up, I just want to invite you to join me in thanking Lisa and saying goodbye to everyone. We're mostly unmuted, so we can do that. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thanks.